Okay, so let us continue with our discussion for our basic computer networking. Now, let us continue with the classless interdomain routing, or the CIDR notation. So what is this CIDR notation? It is a standardized and efficient notation to label IP address. So it's a bit taxing for us to say 255.0.0.0. So in CIDR notation, we just say /8. And why is it that 255.0.0.0 is just /8? Because remember that for each byte in your IP address or even in your subnet mask, that is equal to 1 byte, which is equal to 8 bits. So basically, it's /8 bits. Okay? Now, 255.255, that means you have 2 bytes, or simply in CIDR notation, it's /16. And in your, if you have 255.255.255, that 0, it is just, it will be easier to say /24, which means you have 3 bytes of which is equal to 3 bytes or equal to 24 bits of your subnet mask is used. Now let us use that CIDR notation to solve for the information that we have solved already earlier. So in this case, that would be, so if you have 210.20.30.1/24, we know that the subnet mask is 255, since 24 is basically 3 bytes. 24 divided by 8 is 3 bytes. So that would be 255.255.255.0. So that is your subnet mask. Now, how do we solve for the network address? Now, since it's /24, or simply you have 3 bytes used in your subnet mask, the shortcut is we will just copy the 3 terms of your IP address. So again, since this is /24, 3 bytes is used, 3 digits, we'll just copy the 3 digits in your network address. That must be 10.20.30. And finally, the one that corresponds to 0 is just 0 in your network address. In your broadcast address, on the other hand, it's, again, you have to copy the first 3 digits of your IP address, which corresponds to the 3 bytes of your subnet mask. So that would be 10.20.30, and finally use or add 255 to the last digit of your broadcast address. Now, let's have another activity. This time, all we need to solve is the network address, because our next activity the next activity, we will be creating subnetworks in our office network. So if we have subnetwork, that means all the IP addresses should have a different network address for each router. So let us try to solve for this one. What is the network address of 10.11.12.13/16? So can anyone help me out?
Dollar po. Dollar.
Again? Sino yan? Si Dollar, proceed.
Dollar po.
Yes.
10.11.0.0.
So as easy as that. So for the first IP address, that would be 10.11. Continue. 10.11 dot.
0.0 po.
Yes, 0.0, because since we only 2 bytes of subnet mask is used, that means we will be copying the first 2 digits of your IP address. And this is the network address where this IP address belongs to. Okay? So how about the second IP address?
Bondok po.
Guzman.
Celestine po.
Celestine po.
Sige, Bondoc, proceed.
192.160.170.0.
160.170.0. Again, the reason that this is the network address, we use /24, meaning we use 3 bytes of your subnet mask. Therefore, we need to copy the 3 bytes of your IP address. And lastly,
Coelho.
Nueva po.
Yes
Reason
po.
po.
well, you proceed.
172.0.0.0.
That's 0. That's it. So as easy as that. So we can now proceed to our next activity, designing a multiple network diagram. However, before we proceed with that, let us take note that in the real world, the best practice is to use /24 subnet mask when creating office or home network. So this is the default. It actually comes default to your Windows. If you are creating or you're statically assigning IP address to your Windows machine, it will give you a /24 subnet mask. Okay? So now let us proceed to a sample office network, and our activity right now is to assign IP address to the devices here. Now remember that in assigning IP address, we statically or manually assign IP address to your routers and the router servers access points. For your devices such as laptops, desktop, mobile devices such as smartphones and tablets, we will be using DHCP for that. Now, the circle here is just a reminder that this is a different network from this one and this one. Therefore, in creating addresses for our devices, their network address, the network address of this one, should have a different network address with this one as well as this one. So let's have uh, a sample diagram that we can work on here. Let me just, there you go. So this is your the diagram that we will work on this in this session. So as you can see, your router is connected. The main router here is connected to your internet and connected to your devices in your network. You have a router, a second router connected to your network here, and a router connected to your main router. Now, the reason that we have to create a different network for each router in the real world, you have different requirements for each router. Now, in this case, for example, uh, if this is a school setting and this is a router for your teacher, this is a router for your student. So they must have a different configuration. Like for example, if this is a router for students, there are some websites here that are blocked for student use. Okay, and on the other hand, if this router will be used by teachers, there are no sites that are needed to be blocked. So as you can see, it's always best to create a network for your router. Last time, although meron tayong wireless router, we still have the same network address but this time we will create a network, an IP address for each router that is different from your main router. Okay, so let us do that. Now, so the IP address that we will be using is the private IP address class C. Do you still remember that? So let me show you again the private IP address for different classes. So there you go. So the private IP network address, these are used for office, for home or small office network. This is for mid-sized companies, and this is for large companies. Now, as you can see, since the default in most of your home routers is the Type C, then we will work on this one. So hindi tayo magpapauso ng mga IP address. So if we're talking about the uh, office or company network, we will be using the private IP addresses. Okay? So we will be using this network address 192.168.0. So let's start from there. So going back to your diagram, so we will assign an IP address to this router, which is 192.168.0.1. Okay, again, we cannot use 0 for your devices because 0 is a network address that the router uses to identify the network. Now let us add a subnet mask /24. And why is it again? Because the best practice is we use the /24 subnet for your office networks. Now, let us assign also an IP address for your file server. A file server is important in any company because this is where your important files that are needed by the users in this company. So this is a central storage space for all the users in the company. So let us assign an IP address for that. So I'll be assigning 192.168.0.201. Now, I have my reason kung bakit hindi 2 ang gagamitin ko for this file server because I'll be using 2 192 4R router 2 here. So I'll be using route dot 2 192.168.0.2 for our router 2. And if that's the case, let us use that 3 for your router 3. Okay? Now, so this is how you connect. So let me again show you the connection in the physical connection. How do you connect it physically? Router physically. So suppose this is a router, the ports in a router. So this is where you plug your internet connection. This is called the WAN port. This is the WAN port in your router, and this must be the LAN port of your router. So usually nakapangalan to. If you read it at the back of your router, it's WAN. And these are called the LAN ports. Pero if you're using this in a multiple networks in your company, this is where you connect the external network, and this is used for the internal network. Now, looking back at our diagram earlier on, di ba meron tayong main router connected to 2 routers? So this is where you connect the internet and this is where you connect the cable going to the router. Let's call this, I think I haven't updated that yet. This is your router 1. This is your router 2. There you go. Sorry. This is, I'm sorry again. This is your router 2 and this is your router 3 because this is your router 1. So this, you plug your LAN cable going to router 2 here. But take note, sorry, let me just zoom that part. Oops, sorry. Where's the zooming option there? So let me zoom that part here. Yan. So as you can see, the connection coming from the main router or router 1 goes to your WAN port here. So the WAN port, although it's called the WAN port, it's the, you're connecting that to your external network, which in this case is your main router. Tapos yung internal na, or the devices that will be connecting to this router are called the internal IP addresses. So this would be the external IP address and the internal IP address. So we will create a new network for this one. So that is so if that is the case, magiging dalawa talaga ang IP addresses ng router nyo. So in your home router, dalawa talaga yung IP address niya. The external IP address or the WAN IP address, and the internal IP address or the LAN addresses. Okay? So going back to your diagram here, we will now assign the internal IP address of this router. Okay, so we have to think of an IP address that is different to your main router. So let me assign an IP address that should have a different network address as that of your main router. And I chose 192.168.2.1. Okay, now let's double check. Does this IP address have a different network number than that of your main router? So let's try to solve. So let's double check. So what is the network address of your main router? So again, palagi kong ginagamit si that one because it's easier for us to remember later on. Lalo na if you have 50 or 100 routers in the network, it's much more easier for us to remember that routers are always that one. Okay? Now, of course, it depends upon the design, but the best practice, we usually use that one for our routers. Now, how do we solve again for the network address of router 1?
Quelio.
I think si Quelly, di ba last time? Can we have another one?
Direct po.
Sino yun? Direct, proceed. Sige, direct.
Yung network address po is magiging 192.168.0.0.
So 192.168.0.0. Okay, how about our router 2? What is the network address of our router 2?
Lomadilla po.
Lomadilia. Proceed.
192.168.2.0.
So 192.168.2.0. So as you can see, as you can see, they have a different network address. And if that is the case, then this is a good network diagram. Because the idea is, kailangan iba-iba yung network address ng mga routers. Okay? Understood? So that your packets can easily be routed with no problems. Okay, now, for my next question, what if you have to assign an IP address for this third router? Can you give me an IP address
De
for
Guzman
the
po.
third router? U1?
192.168.0.0.
Yes, proceed.
.0.
So that's zero dot.
0.
That zero, again, you cannot use that zero because it is a network address. The broadcast address and the network address cannot be used for your devices. It is a reserved IP address for special function. In this case, network address are used by routers to identify your network. So you cannot use 0.0. Any other suggestion that we can use?
Pauni.
Pauni, proceed.
Shared dot 3.
Okay, so that again,
3 po.
0.3,
Up.
192.168.0.3.
Up.
But we already used that here for your external address. And another thing, kapag yan ang ginamit mo, magkakapareho sila ng network address. O tingnan natin ha. This has the same network address as that of your router 1. O what is the network address of this? Let us duplicate that. So if it's /24, it's 192.168.0.0. We will be having a problem. You see? Parehas sila ng network address. So this is not accepted. So we need to think of another one.
Angeles permission to speak.
Angeles, proceed.
192.168.3.1.
Okay. So the 3.1. So let's see if this has a different network address. Can anyone tell me the network address of this one?
Nortes.
Palestine.
Nortes?
192.168.3.0.
Okay, that's 192. Sorry. Dot 168.3.0. So as you can see, this has a different IP address as that of your main router, which means this is a good IP address or this is possible. Another thing, kaya sino yung nagsagot dito sa network address? Nortes, right?
Opo.
Sino nagsagot nung IP address natin for router 3?
Angeles po, Chair.
Angeles. Wait lang ha. Let me update that. Okay, so Angeles. So again, we should also write down the subnet mask, which is /24. So the reason kung bakit maganda rin yung pinili niyang IP address to use is because later on, mas madali mong matandaan yung WAN or external IP address niya sa LAN IP address niya because they have a pattern. Okay, tingnan ninyo. Si .2, 192.168.0.2, this is the WAN IP address of router 2. And pagdating sa kanyang LAN IP address, 192.168.2.1, they share a certain trend. Okay? Now, if you have 50 routers, suppose, ang isa dito, for example, I use another correct technically, this is a correct IP address that you can use for router 3. But tingnan nyo, okay. So because it has a different IP address than that of your router 1. However, let's add another 50 routers. If you do not have a pattern that you will be using, then malilito kayo later on if you need to access router 2, router 3, router 5. Someone called you from the office of router 10. Can you please configure this router? So you have to connect that, to connect to that router. If you do not have a system, if you do not have a good design or good assignment of your IP address, sa loob pa lang ng isang araw, masisiraan ka na ng ulo. So you should have basically a good IP address assignment of your devices, mainly the routers, your servers. Okay? So this is the best practice. You have to make a pattern for your WAN IP as well as your LAN IP. Now, for your devices here in the network, hindi na natin siya i-assign manually. But we will be using the IP address pool that we have learned earlier in your DHCP address. So let us again uh, be reminded of your DHCP server. So in your DHCP server, we have an address pool. Okay, I'm sorry again. Okay. It's in caps lock. So let us check the advanced option, the network, the DHCP server, and as you can see here, so this is your IP address pool. So we will be applying that to your network here. So instead of assigning one IP address, I'll be assigning an address pool, IP address pool to your devices connecting to your router here. So I'll just write that 100 to 200. So that means devices connecting to this router will automatically be assigned with any addresses within the range of 192.168.2.100 up to 192.168.2.200. Okay? Okay, pop quiz. How many possible devices can automatically connect to this router and be given an IP address?
Bondok,
Yes, Mondok Alisa.
101.
So 101. So that is correct. So again, for the devices that will be connecting to router 3, so let us assign an address pool for that. So this time it's 3.100 up to 200. So you have 101 hosts, which is in the real world, actually nga, if you connect a router, if you connect uh, 50 devices, medyo mabagal na yung network mo. Kaya okay na yung 100 to 200 for in assigning IP address. So this is a real world office network diagram. Okay? So do you have any questions so far? So in this case, I'll be presenting to you your scaffolding. So this is the second scaffolding task. Uh, Okay, so this is the scaffolding task. Currently, your home network consists of your wireless router located in your living room. So most of the time, sa living room nakakonect yung inyong mga wireless routers. Pero since you are planning to connect to set up a wireless router in your own bedroom, so you will be connecting that wired in using a LAN cable to your from your main router or the living room router going to your bedroom router, wherein your gaming computer resides. Of course, you want to connect this through a LAN cable, and of course, your mobile phone, a wireless connection. So you have to create a diagram of the given setup, complete with your IP addresses. Of course, we have to assume that your living room router should have a different network address than that of your bedroom router or your room router. Any questions so far before we uh, end this session? So let me just pause.